Subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon to never miss a video from us.
Hello and welcome to the Expert Interview Series, and today we have the pleasure of interviewing Mr. Arjun Prakash, a dynamic leader in career transformation and executive compensation. Arjun is the founder of Pivot, a company dedicated to helping individuals land their dream jobs and successfully change careers. With personalized mentorship from industry expert, a stepwise career planner, and dedicated support, Pivot has already guided around 5,000 ambitious professionals toward their career goals. Before founding Pivot, Arjun led the executive reward and governance business at Mercer in India, significantly growing the segment and launching key initiatives. He also brings extensive experience from his time at FW Cook, where he advised companies on executive compensation programs and managed key client relationships. Welcome to the Expert Interview Series, Arjun, and hope our viewers get to learn from your experiences.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah. So before we begin, we would like to understand about your journey, how you started from Mercer and FW Cook, and what motivated you to start Pivot.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. I think it's a good question to kick things off with. So, I'll give you a little bit more context even before the career journey started for me, because I think that will help contextualize why I did what I did later. But basically, I started, I was born and raised in Meerut, which is obviously in North India. Did my high schooling in an international baccalaureate IB school. And this was a time when IB had just started. So it wasn't really accepted in India at that time. It was primarily for kids who wanted to study abroad, even for their undergrad. Right. So I did that. And then my dream was to study in US, especially in New York. So I landed my undergrad spot at NYU, at New York University. And I was, I think, just 17 when I first moved out of India for my higher studies. So I was in New York for about 10 years in total. I did my college for about 3, and then I worked in management consulting in New York for about 7-8 years. So these were my formative years where I had just started my career. And I think I got very fortunate to land a role right after the first financial crisis that had happened in 2008, 2009, which was a pretty bad time for, from a company hiring standpoint. There were hardly any jobs being offered. Somehow, thankfully, by the grace of my stars, I was able to land a good management consulting role, which was with this firm that you mentioned, FW Cook. So FW Cook is a specialized management consulting firm. So comparative to, let's say, more generic consulting firms like McKinsey, Bain, BCG, they primarily focus on HR-related executive compensation, talent management, anything to do with people policies for an organization. They focus on those areas, right? And so from the beginning, my focus with advising organizations was on helping them optimize their talent policies, right? And this was, kind of the foundation for me in the beginning, because almost everything I have done ever since has been very, very human-centric in my career, right? Like helping organizations and now today individuals in achieving their goals, right? So when I was at FW Cook, I did that for 7 years, and then I decided to move back to India in about 2018. I'd just been away for too long from home and family and all those things. So I made a personal decision that after spending almost 14, 15 years away from family, I wanted to be closer. So I moved back and I joined this other consulting firm called Mercer. So FW Cook was a relatively small firm, but with a big market share, but there was still like about just 100 people. Mercer, on the other hand, was about 10,000 people, so a much larger company. And what I was doing there for them was actually building this executive rewards and corporate governance practice for Mercer India from the ground up. So it was sort of, give me a flavor of how do you start things from scratch within a business environment, right? I did that for about 2 years. And one of the things I heard again and again in the Indian environment from our clients and from our, other competitors and other consultants was that the nature of change that businesses were experiencing, especially on the people front, meaning, what people want out of work from a priority perspective, how companies want to get work done from their employees, and the way work gets done, like remote and hybrid and kind of digitized nature of her. So all of these changes were happening very fast. So, what stuck with me, Pooja, was that there's a lot of change happening. And somebody needs to help not just the organization tackle that change, because all the consultants are helping the organizations, but nobody's helping the actual individual at that organization, right? The career professionals, the mid career professionals who are anywhere between 25 to let's say 40 years old typically. So my focus then became on how do we help these folks make smoother and successful career transitions if they were thinking about changing their role, changing their domain, industry, or level in the organization. Nobody really is helping them today. And that hypothesis was proven right because I spoke with a lot of people within my network at that time before I started Pivot, who all told me that they had considered career transitions, but they got demoralized because of the daunting nature. And even the ones who had tried and got successful, they said they hated the process, right? It was very stressful. So that's where it all started for Pivot. So in 2020, I started Pivot to, like you said, build something which will be an all-in-one solution for people who are looking for personalized support and tools and insights to successfully navigate transitions. Yeah,
Right.
That's the background.
So how does Pivot help out these individuals? I mean, do you give personal guidance?
Sure. When we first started Pivot, we wanted to understand what problem we are solving, right?
Right.
So we spoke with a lot of people. We tried to also understand the current solutions that existed in the market, even though they're very few and far between.
Right.
But what we realized is the problem is threefold for people who are trying to transition. Number one, it's a very haphazard journey because there is no structured playbook out there that says, okay, you're supposed to do this. It's like, for example, imagine a student going to the school, but having no curriculum or no schedule table or anything like that, telling them this is what they're supposed to do. So every kid is inventing their own playbook, their own curriculum, right? That's problem number one. Second problem, it's very lonely process because usually people don't go out seeking help. They usually just speak with people in their own network. So whether it's their family, friends, or it could be sometimes colleagues as well. But in all cases, they don't get any structured support. These are just one-off coffee chats, right? And there's no follow-up because nobody is seriously that interested in anybody else's career. Everybody is mostly interested in their own career, right? So it's a lonely journey. And then the last thing is that it can be sometimes very costly if you want to go to, let's say, a business school, or you want to go to, let's say, a career coach even, who charge you at least about 5,000 for 1 hour session, at least. And on average, anywhere between 10 to 20,000 per session, right? So all of these problems were there and we wanted to tackle these issues. So what did we do? First and foremost, we built something which provides people a structure within our platform to navigate their journey in an organized manner. So we came up with I would say, first ever career transition planner, right? So this consists of specific steps and modules that you can apply without having to create your own playbook, right? You focus on execution, not coming up with what you need to do, right? So that's one. The second thing is, because of the lonely nature, we also created a marketplace of industry experts and certain coaches that specialize in mentoring people in helping them navigate these kind of transitions. So, and then finally, because things are generally costly, we have kept it quite affordable. So our general pricing ranges anywhere between, I would say, about 5,000 rupees to 15,000 rupees for our programs, where, I mean, if you look at that compared to some of the other programs out there, we are charging maybe 1/5 to 1/10 of what other players are charging, right? So it's a pretty democratized manner in which we are building Pivot, where anybody and everybody can access all these tools, mentoring, insights to be able to make achieve their career goals. So yeah, these are some of the things we are focused on.
Is this related to something specific, some specific domain, or in general, anybody who's, let's suppose, transitioning from retail management to compliance?
It's fairly industry agnostic because we are not an edtech platform, right? When you're an edtech platform, you have to think about very deeply which particular domains or industries you're going to focus on, because you're developing pedagogy, you're developing the whole instructional design and whole set of educational format around that particular subject. We don't have to do all of that, right? Yes, we need we need, let's say, experts from specific areas who can guide our users in that particular field. But there's no restriction for us. We can get people from pretty much any domain that we want, right? And as far as the other solutions that we provide, like the access to our frameworks and our tools and templates, that is industry agnostic. That can be applied to almost any different type of domain or industry. So we generally don't have a industry or domain restriction, but I would say organically we get interest from people in primarily around 10 to 12 areas, which is where we focus on most. So half of them are more tech-oriented tools and half of them are slightly less tech-oriented tools.
So just one more question to complete the cycle. Does Pivot also help in placing individuals, those who enroll?
We don't. We are not a placement company, or we are not a recruitment company necessarily, right? We do have connections at companies. We could potentially help you land a role at the target company that you have in mind, but we don't guarantee anything. I mean, even the placement companies don't guarantee, but we don't want to come across as a placement company, because what we do is much more than just placement, right? We go through, for example, understanding whether you are in the right career to begin with, whether you're pursuing the right role. So getting clarity on your goals at the first stage of your pivot journey is paramount for our users, right? And that impacts not just your next 2 years, but your next 20 years, right? So we don't want to be perceived just as a placement firm, even though we do maximize your chances of landing your target role at your dream companies.
This brings clarity a lot about how a cycle works for an individual who comes to Pivot. If you can just share some tips for someone who's considering career change.
Sure. See, like I just mentioned, actually, the first and most important thing to think about from a career change or any ambitious goal that you have in mind is to break it down into more manageable, more digestible steps, right? So, journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. And that's very, very true for career transition, because most people today, if they think about a transition, they get daunted by seeing, oh my God, there is so many things to do. Might as well just stay within my current role, even if I'm miserable or even if I feel stuck, right? That can change if your mindset changes, where you think about taking small actions on a consistent basis. So that's my number one tip or strategy for anybody who's thinking about a career transition, because it takes at least a couple of months, not just a couple of days or weeks.
Okay.
The second thing is, you have to have a very important sort of reason or foundation for why you're pursuing that transition, right? This is critical because it gives you clarity with regard to why this would be a good thing for you in your career, and that drives your motivation to keep going even when you face hurdles. If your why is weak, if you don't know why you're pursuing this transition, at moments when you get challenged in a tough job market, you might feel like giving up. But if your why is strong, you will continue with resilience, overcoming those hurdles. And the other reason this why is very important is because when you're clear in your head about why you're making this transition, you can convince others as well around you, right? And it's not just your friends and family who might have pushback, but mostly the recruiters and hiring managers, right? You need to have a very compelling pitch for recruiters and hiring managers why you would be a better candidate than somebody else who has 5 or 10 years of experience in that field, right? So knowing your why is one of the most important things you can do. Last thing I would share is, a lot of people do see this as a solo struggle. For some reason, they romanticize this idea of like, I will study, I will work on this locked up in my room, and someday I will, get to the finish line. Yes, you have to work hard. You have to spend some solo time, but you can also get support from people. Rather, you should get support from others, whether it's, your colleagues, friends, and family for moral support, or it's career coaches or platforms like Pivot, whatever be the case. Have a personal board of advisors, as we say. People who are there with you till the end, they become your support system, right? They become your personal board of advisors. So have that as much as possible, even if it's 2 people, have that. So these are some of the things at a high level that
A lot of advice, lot of wisdom from your end, but still, what's your advice to young professionals, who are seeking to make, career drives and
Yeah, I mean, since we have been doing so much advice, right, I'll maybe share a story so it can be a little different of an answer this time rather than just pointers. Um, I'll give you my own story. So when I started my career, I was at NYU, and this was, like I said, a pretty bad time for the job market, similar to how it is today, right? Like we just heard in the news, 35% or more of IIT Bombay graduates weren't able to land a role, which is crazy, right? I mean, it's one of the best, if not the best technology school in India. If those students are struggling, you can only think about the other students. So this was a similar scenario that was happening when I graduated right after financial crisis. And a lot of people around me weren't landing roles. A lot of my friends who were here in US, they had to go back to India just because they couldn't find a role, right? So, I mean, obviously luck plays a huge role, but there were certain things which I feel worked for me at that time, right? And I did a couple of things which I felt were slightly different than the average fresher or average job seeker in the market. I may be wrong, but you can take it or leave it, right? Since you asked me the question, I have the honor of answering it. So what did I do which I feel that was different? I think the first thing that I did that was different was I didn't do it alone. I utilized the help of the career coaches, and there was basically a career center at NYU which helped people get into their first full-time role, and they provided the same support to everybody. So it wasn't like they help you differentiate your profile much, but because when you're applying for the first time, you don't really know much what are the right things, right best practices from a resume standpoint, from an interview preparation standpoint, from a career selection standpoint, right? Like what career should I choose, which company should I apply to? So all of these things are very new for a fresher. And if you start to just Google these things or ask a couple of friends, you don't get very full-fledged advice because most of your friends are also doing it for the first time. So how will they guide you? So I think going to those career centers within your universities, even if it's not top of the notch kind of support, even if it's, let's say, average support, utilize that, right? Don't do it on your own. It's the same advice I shared earlier. So that was one, right? I took their guidance in pretty much every area that I could. The second thing I did was I didn't just focus on landing a job. I focused on understanding where I had maximum chances of landing a role. So what people do today, because of single clicks and because of such easy portals that allow you to apply to pretty much any role within a minute, people are applying to just random roles all the time, right? They search for roles. Sometimes the search doesn't result in great outputs. So let's say I search for project manager. I was looking for a non-technical project management role, but I get a technical project manager role. Without seeing what the requirements are, I just hit on apply, right? And I spent maybe half a minute, but it goes nowhere. Nobody sees it. Nobody actually reviews your application. Nobody thinks twice about hiring you. So end of the day, if you're doing it for half an hour every day, you're wasting almost 3 hours a week. You're wasting about 12 hours a month doing that time. So people, especially students and freshers, because they are very new at this, they think just applying randomly to jobs is the way to go. When you should be doing other things. Firstly, you should understand what roles you should target. Make a list of companies where you think those roles are being hired for. Check out not just portals like LinkedIn, but the company websites or more niche portals which are industry specific in nature. There are plenty of them today if you try to find out. Hit those as well. And the other thing I would say is also make sure to actually personalize your application. So you don't have to change your resume completely from start to finish, but try and understand what are companies looking for when they are hiring. So this is something I did a lot in my own job search when I first started. I made sure I understood what were companies looking for, and I personalized my resume, spending like 15-20 minutes on each application, right? So these kind of things really, really helped me out, I think. And the last thing I would share is you will face a lot of rejections in this process. It's just part of the process, right? It's kind of like when you're applying to IIT and you're giving your mains exam and all that, you will be bound to fail most of the time. So that's the nature of the process. So similarly, You will fail most of the times, and that's okay. You just need to learn from that experience, not get demoralized. If you start getting emotional, right, it's a, what do you call it? It's basically a downward spiral, right? You start to spiral, you start feeling like, oh, I'm not good enough and all that stuff, which is of no use because 90% of people are going through that journey. So if, it's not that 90% of people are not good enough. It's just that the process takes time. You have to keep going. You just have to learn what's not working and then improve upon it. So yeah, these are some of the things which I can share from my own experience that worked out well for me, I think.
So recently, one of the talent acquisition managers that we interviewed, he pointed out that we get, resumes flowing in like it's like draining, and we could not filter out because everybody is applying, irrespective, seeing whether the profile fits their job role or not. So it's it's kind of draining for them as well to go through those resumes. So personalizing those resumes is one, I think, best advice for everyone who's watching.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, moving to the last and the final question, how do you keep yourself motivated and continue to innovate in your field?
I guess those are related but slightly different questions, I would say, in a way. I think the motivation for me stems from just the purpose with which we have started Pivot, right? The impact that we want to create. Because motivation cannot always come from external sources. Thankfully, now we are at a stage where we have a lot of, good traction. So, people find our platform useful. They find the experts' guidance and mentorship useful. So that becomes a big motivation. But when you first start something, when we first started Pivot, you don't have customers on day one, right? For most startups, at least. So I think those are the more, I would say, difficult times to keep yourself motivated when you don't have external, validation and sort of testimonials. So in those times, the only thing that for me worked was knowing that I was going to come across challenges. And I think really what helps you get over the day-to-day humps is just know that if you make it to the other side, you will be one step closer to creating the kind of impact that you envisioned when you first started your startup, right? I mean, for the first year, I didn't really have much traction, to be honest. I came from a non-technical background and started a technical, like a tech platform. I had actually not ever been a career coach. I had mentored people within my own firms, but that was the extent of guidance, career guidance that I have provided, right? So it was a pretty steep learning curve for me early on, and I had to really upskill myself, really understand the problem deeply, and I think, Pooja, it took almost a year for that. And some people might say, oh, wow, that's so much time. And, people build unicorns today within 2-3 years. So, you're taking so much time. So that's why I feel like every person has their own journey. You shouldn't always compare with, other people. Like I landed a job in, after graduation from NYU when most people weren't landing a job. But then, I started a startup which took a little more time to get traction than perhaps an average startup that is successful, right? Although 90% of them fail, but even from the 10%, if you look at the success journey, they might get it earlier. So I think it's bad to compare journeys. And so that was another key motivation for me, right? Like if you don't always compare your successes and failures to others, you have that internal drive that keeps you going. And that internal drive is primarily fueled by the purpose or the impact that you want to create. So I think that's a motivation. I think that's a very good question. I've probably thought more about innovation than an average person, really, because when you're thrust into in an environment like US, which if you look at US, most of the tech startups that have started in the world were started in US and Silicon Valley, at least the ones with the biggest impact in the world, right? So in a way, you can think about US as the hub of innovation, and everybody in US, especially people in, let's say, Silicon Valley and New York and these kind of places, it's in their blood, it's in their genes. They kind of never think about just building something by copycatting it. I have never seen that. Most people would think about what problem they are trying to solve and then just see what is the best solution. And whatever it takes to build the best solution, they just do that. And innovation happens in that process, right? It's not a goal they're trying to achieve that, oh, I have to be innovative. They're just trying to solve the problem and finding out what is the best way to solve that problem. And that is what results in innovation. Culture of a lot of experimentation. With experimentation, you get failures also. So there is also a much bigger appetite around accepting failures and moving on, rather than considering them as something extremely negative. They are considered as something that is part of the process to get to success, right? So for me, these are some of the things that I took away while I lived in US, right? Like, firstly, you don't have to copy something if you understand deeply the problem you're trying to solve or the vision that you're trying to build, right? You have to just really understand it, and then you start to figure out what are the best ways to build the products in a stepwise manner, right? Like, for example, for me, for Pivot, the first thing I did was not think about the solution. The first thing I did was talk to about 30 people in my own network to understand what was the career transition journey like. Was it good, bad? If bad, what were the things that didn't work for them? I literally did surveys like a market researcher would do. Even though I was an entrepreneur, I did surveys, right? Trying to just understand the breadth and the depth of the problem with hundreds of people. Right? And thankfully, I got good responses. So that became my North Star, to understand, okay, these are the problems that I'm trying to solve. Then I did a lot of, competitive market research also to see what was already done, because I didn't want to necessarily recreate the wheel. If somebody had already done something, I actually didn't want to recreate exactly the same thing, because for me, it's not just about building a business. It's about, building something that adds value, that actually gives back to the community as well. So if I'm just building, let's say, another, Coursera or Upgrad or something like that, I mean, I may fail, because how can you compete with those mammoth organizations? But even if that's not the issue, because, there could be many players in the ecosystem, my drive wasn't coming from, let's just build a business, let's apply a proven model. My drive was coming from the fact of, how do I solve this particular problem? Okay? So yeah, I mean, these are some of the things I would say that helps drive innovation. The last thing I would say is, there are a couple of experimentative exercises that any entrepreneur or startup team could do, right? There are plenty of them available through books and through, the right blogs and those kind of avenues. So I would say, if you can, go through those, articles, avenues, etc., it gives you a framework for how to be creative, because otherwise you can't just daydream creativity. You have to, apply certain mental models, certain frameworks to be able to do it in a more structured manner.
I think a lot of learning from your end, and how one should, as an entrepreneur, go about. It's not about daydreaming. I've come up with an idea and I'm going to start. So I think, given a very clear path how one should go about creating, understanding the why and how they should go about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much for your time, and it was a pleasure. A lot of learning, and hope the viewers who are going to see this are going to learn and it adds value. And if somebody is seriously looking for a career change, we would definitely want them to approach you for the same.
Sure. Thanks so much for having me, Pooja. It was nice speaking with you.
Same here. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Bye.
Subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon to never miss a video from us.